Hey, Charles, thank you for coming in. You've got a really great background. There's a lot of stuff. You're an entrepreneur. You have this passion for AI and data and your voice technology currently, but you've been working with sort of the analytics side for a long time, and you combine all of these different technical elements, but also this sort of working with different industries, and all of that is so valuable today. So thank you for coming in and sharing your insights with our audience.
Yeah, thanks for setting up this interview. I'm excited to, speak to others who are passionate about using AI for good.
So, Charles, what were the inflection points in your life that led you to this wonderful career that you have, your interest in technical matters and so on? And it could have been something that happened when you were 3 years old or five, could have been a family member, something happened in school, could be career moves. What were those, two or three magic moments that made who you are today?
Oh, yeah, great question. I think the first one maybe happened before I was born. So my mom, Thai, my dad is Danish American. Two cultures, two different sides of the world coming together, and then me being half of both sides. And I did a TED Talk recently where I explained, the my life has been kind of blending two cultures, being the bridge between two cultures, and perfecting, so I work with voice technology, but I perfected my accent in Thai and English, so I can jump in between. And I've noticed that I jump between identities too. And then to see AI in its current form just kind of go onto the scene and its ability to mimic what I do, but just not like I perfected it in one language, but it can perfect it across all languages. So I think that was when I put it all together, I was like, wow, what this can do, in terms of understanding each other and bridging cultures and bridging everybody, what I've perfected over 40 years. I think that realization was the biggest inflection point.
That's interesting because I noticed in your background, you're part of the West Michigan Asian American Association. And I was thinking, Charles Elwood, how is that? And then I noticed there's these characters, it looked like Thai characters in your name, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, if you speak to bicultural children, we're always like, where do we belong? Going back and forth, and I think just recently, and I was able. It's an ability if you talk to adoptees and people that are bicultural, like we're like, we've come up with, and a lot of them call it being a chameleon. We can just like blend in, and we learn to mimic voice patterns, and we body language, all kinds of stuff, right? And we could jump from identity to identity. And I think I've been hiding, just kind of in plain sight, because I just become a chameleon and I'd like just adopt whatever culture I'm in. But more recently, I'm like, I feel like I'm a lot of Thai inside because I lived in Thailand for a while. So I started putting that on my signature and stuff. And it weirds people out, right? Like you just did. It's like Charles Elwood does not sound like a Thai name, but what are these characters? And I get a lot of people asking that. And I tell my story. So
It's interesting. Now, I was in Thailand in, let's see here, I guess the end of November into, oh, sorry, the end of October into the first days of November. And that's because I've been trying to support the work of DTGO. There's a company called DTGO and INC and then
yeah.
so TNB Media Global, and they're part of the CP family, which is quite famous in Thailand.
Oh, yeah, the chicken. Yeah. Charon Pokpan. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're family members of that family, and then so I kind of relate to Thailand. I think they're doing some really really great work. In fact, the biggest metaverses, I think the most advanced in the world today, actually come from MQDC, DTGO, and then also TMB Media Global. So when you mentioned the Thai aspect, I could sort of have synergy with that. So that's really really fascinating. Now, so I see this background being really a big sort of foundational part of your life, this bicultural aspect to you. And so, like, when did you move to America? When did that happen? Or was it sort of going back and forth on a continuing basis? I mean, you don't have an accent, right? So
Yeah.
what's that story?
So my mom was studying in South Dakota. I was born in South Dakota, but when I was 1, they took me to Thailand, and they did a really cool thing where they put me in a Thai school first. So my first language was Thai, and then the last 4 years, when I was 4, they put me in the international school in Bangkok. And I remember them telling me the stories. I failed it was the Iowa test of basic skills. And they're like, oh, we don't think he can go to this school because he doesn't understand English, and I almost got kicked out of the school like at 4, But that story resonates with me because it's language is so important to us, our ability to communicate, receive information, good information. But then I moved to the Netherlands, and there's a different language and different cultures there. And I was there for 4 years. And then I moved to, oh, no, it was Indonesia before that. So I was in Balikpapan for 4 years, then the Netherlands. And then I went to Louisiana, which is funny because Cajun French, there's a whole different, it's a region of the US, but it's like its own country down in Lafayette, Louisiana. So it was just, that was my childhood. Going to new culture, new country, new identity,
So,
adapting.
so
Yeah.
why was this constant sort of change going from country to country? Is it sort of like your parents' work or something like that? Or
Yeah, both my parents were geologists, and my dad worked for an oil company. And it was, thinking back when I was going through it, it was the hardest times because you had to give up your identity and your friends and everything on every move. But now that I'm older, I look back and it was the coolest experience. And I wish everybody could see what I saw because you see the world, you see kind of how cultures are multidimensional, and you see the world kind of in a different perspective.
so you have this multicultural education, Southeast Asia to the Netherlands is quite a different kind of stretch. And I mean, I have friends in the Netherlands, so and the culture very distinct and very kind of straightforward, right? And sometimes
Yeah.
they're blunt, but
Yeah, right. And you go from Thailand, which is like, community, you get consensus, very, I've heard
right.
Japanese, work with Japanese come, and then you go to Dutch culture, which is, very direct sometimes. And you're like, whoa, like, and then I live in Holland, Michigan now, and there's something called West Michigan Nice, which you kind of hide everything, and so it's neat to jump from culture to culture and be able to understand the language of the culture. Yeah, it's been so fun.
So when you were really young, then did you have an interest in science and mathematics and engineering and things like that, or did that come through college?
No, it was when I was younger, I took apart all the electronics I could find to try to fix them, to solder, to wire everything together and make it work again. Every radio I had, I think I took apart and put back together. It's my room was a mess of wires and electronics and the RC cars and trains. Yeah.
Experience in college, electrical engineering, and then a master's in industrial administration. Can you talk about that journey then? And so now I can see you had this sort of hobby about taking things apart that are technology based, and you were handy with a soldering iron and so on. So then you get into electrical engineering, right? And so what's that journey like? And then your master's.
Oh, I went to Rose-Hulman undergrad, and at the time they had this integrated curriculum, which was a fascinating curriculum that I was a part of, where they taught you to keep track of levels of learning for each type of problem. And the last level of learning was the application, taking all the equations you learned and applying it in a much bigger problem. So I learned a lot about learning through that program. And the best thing they ever did was it was kind of a capstone project that freshman year. And they said, build something and apply all your lessons learned. So we had a group of 4 that built a Tesla coil. And I was like, I had no idea, but we had to find bottles. And I was like, glass bottles for the capacitor. I was like, well, you know, my next door dorm neighbor likes to throw parties. So I went over there. It's like, hey, do you have any glass bottles? He's like, oh yeah, we got a whole bunch right here, right? College days. So we built a Tesla coil, and we tested down by our gym, you know, the big building, and we used one of the poles to ground the capacitor. And it was just you know, it was kind of feeding that curiosity, that wanting to learn, to push the edges, to just make and create. And that was part of the undergrad journey. And that allowed me to explore and explore the edges of what was possible by building this Tesla coil. And you know, then I did the MBA, and I think that was so fascinating too, because you know, engineering is so cut and dry, black and white. The math, like this is the math. But then you get into MBA, and it was more group work. It was more collaboration with others, and it was more, you know, like accounting was like depreciation, amortization tables, and I was like, this is not black and white. Like, so I got to see a different. It was almost like a different culture. You know, like I had moved to this different country, and I was like, what is going on here? So I had to adapt, and I struggled, Stephen, when I first started the MBA school. I thought about not doing it, but I stuck with it. I'm glad I did.
And then you ended up with automotive giants like Delphi Automotive and Johnson Controls. So what was that like?
Oh, like I asked another, you know, I was like, what? I asked another friend who was younger, and I was like, what is it? Why do you like working here? And he's like, where else can you work with people doing cutting edge technology and some of the brightest names in the world, and beam a signal up to a satellite and have it come down from outer space into a vehicle, and then you're part of this team that analyzes the data and figures out what's going to fail in the car. And we had talked a little bit about this, but we were doing this 20 years ago. We were doing it before it was cool. Like, you know, AI was cool, and looking at patterns and data and stuff. And I know you were doing it too early on. So that's what it was like working with these automotive giants. Is they have resources, and they have some of the smartest people in the world working on the coolest things, exploring the outer edges of what's possible.
And then how did you get into entrepreneurship? So were you starting companies and building apps while you were at Delphi Automotive and Johnson Controls, or did you leave and then say, you know what, I'm going to start companies and so on?
Great question. So I was always into VBA, writing code, analyzing lab data, trying to find the patterns. And you know, and there was one time I remember code coming on a screen, and I trained my brain to read the code so I could watch it, kind of like in the Matrix, right? I was like, wow, human brains have the capacity to learn a new language and understand code on the fly, in flight. So that led to, you know, and then I worked with other corporate companies, but I always have a problem where, you know, me personally, I felt like I was failing. I wasn't learning fast enough. And I kept telling myself, I'm going to get fired because I'm not, you know, I just felt like I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. So it was 3 years ago, and, you know, in family too. I wanted to be more involved with family and develop my kids for their future. And I couldn't make it to one of the kids' appointments. And I was like, I am done working with other people's rules. I want to create my own rules and explore my own journey. And so that's when I started the entrepreneurship journey. Is I made my own rules. And Stephen, it was so scary. I remember the first 2 weeks, I was like, I don't know what to do. I've spent my whole life, people told me what to do. And I was like, I was sitting at home, I was like, I don't know what to do here. So, but now I've gotten into the cadence of like, okay, every day, you know, I'm going to explore the outer edges, and it's going to be my passion. And that leads into, you know, the neural voice for people who have lost a voice. You know, I was like, I need to do this for those people, and I have access to this technology that can give them their voice back. So that's where I took that journey.
So was that in 2019 or before that, or a little bit after?
Yeah, I think it was 19. It was a few months before the pandemic hit. And you know, it was interesting. I started this business. Initially, I was just going to do Power BI for companies, and analyze data. for them and build a data model. And then pandemic hit and all my jobs dried up. And then not shortly after, I got this opportunity to work with the Azure Percept, which was AI on the edge. And once I saw that you can custom train an AI model, put it on an edge device and deploy it, I was like, wow, this is so powerful. Like, you could clean the data on the edge. You can analyze the data right on the device where the data is coming in. And it could be mobile. And that's where I helped the girl who was nonverbal and she had motion constraints. I was like, this is a portable edge AI device that can monitor. She uses signs, but in her own way. So it could be trained for her own language. And then it could output the sound. And it was in her mother's voice. So I was going to use neural voice. So she would sign in her own dialect and then output the voice in her mother's voice.
Okay, so let's go a little bit back and unpack what you just said. You started playing with Power BI, but so you were working with Microsoft products then and some of the companies before, and you became an MVP. What's that MVP journey like? How did you become a most valuable professional with Microsoft?
It was this device. So I worked with Avi Singh, who was an MVP in Power BI, and I was like, I love Power BI. I saw the value it could give to companies, societies, solve problems so fast. And I was like, this is the most powerful thing. But then I got introduced to that Azure Percept, and I was like, wow, streaming, analyzing data in flight. I was like, and the mobility that comes with Edge AI, I was like, this is just even more powerful. And so what happened is I started helping that nonverbal girl create a dialect for her and working with a Microsoft team. And they're like, wow, most of the times people apply this to business applications, making widgets on the factory line, but nobody's ever helped a person who couldn't communicate in our society with this technology. And you've done it in a way that improves their quality of life and makes her included in society. And they said, this has never been thought of like this. That's the cool part about all this technology. We could find the edges of where it does good for society. And they said, you're already, it was a Microsoft employee, Amira, and she said, you're already an MVP. Are you an MVP now? And I was like, no. And she's like, let me nominate you because you need to be in here because you're doing stuff that the world needs to know about.
I see. When was that? And again, sort of around 2019?
This was a year and a half ago, maybe. So, yeah, 20, was it 20? Yeah. 21, 22. Yep.
So this company that or this app and company that you founded that can, give voice in essence, right? Using Azure technology. What was the name of that company?
So I run it under SolisMatica, but there's also MyAudioBank. And that's an interesting story because MyAudioBank is the idea that you can now preserve your voice for the future. And that all came out because I helped two throat cancer patients recover their voice. One was going into surgery, so I gave her peace of mind. Then there was Maria, who was born nonverbal. Then there was more recently an ALS. There's cerebral palsy. Those are interesting because they have a voice now, but their voice will degrade with diseases because it'll attack their vocal cords, the muscles. So I'm trying to preserve the voice in a way so that they have it in the future. So that's the voice banking part of it.
I see. So you created this company called SolisMatica, right?
Right. Yep.
And then you've got this MyAudioBank underneath that SolisMatica.
Right.
And then SolisMatica its kind of vision is about using neural technologies to help with voice overall.
SolisMatica, yeah, is much broader. It's more for AI for society. So I use it I'm going into a lot of schools now, teaching people about ChatGPT and AI and how it can augment learning and give students access to knowledge. in ways they've, we're pushing the edges of what are possible. So prompt engineering and stuff. And then I was lumping in the audio stuff inside of it, but that got big enough where I spun it off and kind of did the sub business of MyAudioBank.
Okay, so in the audience, there's so let me go back a bit. This kind of interview appears with ACM, and we got 4 million people who use our services, and we are definitely #1 in computing science. Another audience that the interviews go out to is IEEE, the largest technology organization in the world. Again, I would say their user base is in the millions. So what if there's engineers out there or computer scientists, but they haven't played with AI yet? What are some of the steps to get into how would they start doing what you're doing? And take it step by step, and because you're so familiar with Microsoft, I guess that'd be the easiest example then. So they go online and type in Azure, and then they see some websites, and then they sign up for Azure, some kind of free access to try it out. And then once they do that, then they try to, as a subset to Azure, OpenAI, and try that out. How do you start? And what's that onboarding process like? And is it complicated, or would you say it's easy?
It's complicated. It's and I actually have this conversation with Azure and Microsoft employees all the time. They know how powerful Azure OpenAI is, and they know how powerful neural voice and custom speech is. And they want to give access to this to everybody, but it's such a big company, and all these modules inside of Azure are developed independently. So sometimes it's hard to connect them all together. So I would just with Shiva in Australia, how do we get this to more people? Because that's I've heard from them and myself, I'm concerned about this. This is very, very powerful. How do we get access to this to as many people as possible? So I based on what you said, how do you get started? Go to Azure, I think azure.com, sign up for an account, and there's a lot of free resources. And you'll have to, one of the barriers to entry is you have to put in your credit card information. But there's I want to put this out there. There's so many free resources. So putting your credit card doesn't mean they're going to charge you. It gives you access at that point. It's the barrier we need to overcome to get to all of this. And then once you get in there, I think it's oai.azure.com is where it's the studio they've built. So it's not well advertised, but if you type into that, then it's much, much easier to, they kind of built a UI, and it's a studio. And it's meant to give people a playground, if you will, to OpenAI inside of the Azure world. And this is, where you can deploy your own GPT secure model, and your input doesn't get trained. That's one of the barriers is, well, I don't want to put my information into ChatGPT because it might take my information and retrain the model. I want to put that out there to all the listeners is, use OpenAI inside of Azure, because your data is secure, it's yours, and it doesn't go anywhere. So that's, I guess those are the main things I want to convey to everybody.
So you could be person X. Person X can go into the Azure platform. They can apply for an account, some kind of a subscription account. And I guess they'll get some kind of ID to associate with them.
Yeah.
The system will remember this then, so that when they go into the playground and they sign in with the account where they got the subscription, the system will know that they got the subscription, and it'll open them up. Or will it get confused and say, I don't see an account with you, or something like that?
Yeah, so I think, yes, if once you have the Azure account and then you go into Azure AI Studio, it's all linked together under your subscription. So that's the other confusing part. They have environments and subscriptions and stuff. So they set up an ID, and then there's studios that give you an UI. So if there's anybody in the audience that wants to play with neural voice, the AI, the Whisper API inside of Azure, then you go to speech.microsoft.com, and then there's a different studio to play with the speech, and it's a playground there that's associated with, like you said, that one ID and that one subscription. So it's not well advertised, but there's a bunch of studios they've created to give people access to their technology behind the scenes that's easier to understand.
Once you get a subscription, do you have to do some basics like set up a model, something like that before you can open up a studio?
Oh no, so you log into the studio, these studios, I think they call them studios, which is the UI. And I have one open, so I'm gonna talk about my screen because I have it open on here. I have the AI studio. There's a little bit of work where you say deploy a model. So for example, in this screen I have right here, I said, I want GPT-4, I want to deploy it. And you deploy it on your own private kind of server on Microsoft. And then it comes up the next time you log in, you say, I want to use that deployed GPT-4 model on this special server. And it gives you like, what is your system prompt? And then it gives you a chat window. So it looks a lot like ChatGPT, but it's now your own GPT network.
Okay, so because these are unscripted interviews, so do you think that you could quickly demonstrate as if you're person X, you're signing for a Azure subscription, and then you go from there into the studio, and then you show deploying a model, or do you think that's not possible in real time?
Yeah, well, so a lot of times I have to be careful because when you go into the studio, it shows my subscription ID, and that's supposed to be kept private. But yeah, I actually have, I can show this screen right here. I think, yeah, I can show this screen, which is GPT-4 deployed, and what I did this morning to prepare for your talk, this interview, if that works.
Okay, so let me grant you access here.
I love this. I love real-time stuff. It's
okay. There you go. You got access, right?
All right. Let's try. All right, screen 2. I'm going to share this. All right. Can you see my screen, Stephen?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So what's interesting? Yeah, I've got a system message on the right, and I put in there kind of who I am, what my values are, my Colby personality traits. But then on the right side, this is what I do to prepare for every interview. So this is my GPT-4 deployed in the Azure. And then I cut and paste your whole LinkedIn profile. So you can see here, this is LinkedIn profile for Stephen Ibaraki. And I cut and paste the whole thing in here for you. Can you see that, or is it pretty small?
No, I can see it. Okay. On the right side. So on the right side, I can see it.
Yeah.
No,
and then I have I told GPT-4 that they have to be an expert psychologist, neurologist, metacognition, social psychologist. And I had them analyze your LinkedIn profile about what you're interested in. So it talked about personal growth, continuous learning, AI for good, improving human cognition, right? All these things to prepare for the interview. And then I said, we're both AI MVPs. What kinds of questions do you think Stephen's followers would be interested in hearing about, right? So it's like, oh, your journey into the AI field, how you became an AI MVP, questions you asked, right? So I had a head start coming into this interview. I know it's unscripted, but I use GPT-4 inside of Azure, so it doesn't go anywhere. And I had a play-by-play of how to prepare for this.
Right, and at least on my screen here on the system message side, which is kind of a way of doing retrieval augmented generation. It's kind of, you're training it a little bit with data, right? So
yeah, which and I wanted to give this tip to other people that are watching, but I set up that system message, and it took me about a month, but every day I would chat with that system message. And at the end of the day, I would ask GPT-4, I was like, can you review our whole chat today? and review this system message that I put in at the beginning of the day, and tell me how you would change this system message to make it so I can cut and paste a new one in tomorrow and make it more impactful based on my needs. And it would do that. And I was like, well, highlight the changes in bold too, so I can know what you're changing. So it was metacognition. It was itself thinking about our conversation and making our conversation better tomorrow.
So let's get back to stop sharing. And
Yeah.
okay, that was kind of cool, right? You gave a real-time example of this
Yeah.
really friendly environment that you're encouraging people to have a look at, right?
Yeah, and Microsoft is hungry to give this, speaking with the Microsoft employee in Australia, she wanted to give this to people who have never played with AI before, because you and I know how powerful this is. And they want it to somebody who's never been introduced to Azure, to OpenAI, to ChatGPT. They want to give this access to everybody. So,
Right.
and you
So
saw how easy it was. Yeah. Yep.
yeah, now you're a technical advisor for the service for Azure OpenAI, Neuro Voice, DTS, or SDT, and data analytics using Power BI. And you talked about how Power BI really got you really excited. And so how does one become an MVP? Because you're an MVP, a most valuable professional. And what does that mean to be a Microsoft most valuable professional?
That's a great question. I think, listening to when I first got nominated, I think it was, being an advocate and teaching others. So there's so much in Azure and in OpenAI, and a lot of people don't have time to explore, but then explore and then build a network and then to share that knowledge. And I know I've heard this multiple times. They want to use this for good. So, like, for example, the patients that are going to lose their voice, people that want to preserve their legacies for their great-great-grandchildren, for example, all this stuff. Or I'm working a lot with youth now, how to get access to this knowledge, because they're, after this year, they're going to be the ones living in this world where they have access to this knowledge. So it's just, for me, being an MVP is learning, finding the edges of all this, figuring out how to get over the barriers, like kind of like I said, that, the credit card, like we have to get over that barrier and give people access to this because it's so important for our future. And just sharing like I'm doing here with you, and you're an MVP too. So, you may have some insights, but I think it's just sharing, learning, growing, and then sharing that with others so that they can get access to this technology.
So you're part of the Microsoft's Most Valuable Professional Program. It's an award. You can't be a Microsoft employee to get it. You got to be somebody outside of the Microsoft system. So it's really a recognition of people outside of the Microsoft company who are doing just extraordinary work in areas of technology and are also advocates for the good use, what I call tech for good. And you've been able to achieve this award multiple times. So what was your first granting of the award?
What was my first granting? So the year and a half ago, I just got renewed, I don't know, 6 months ago. So I've been renewed now. And it's, the original one was really that project that helped that girl with sign, her dialect and speaking it back in her mother's voice. And then I do a lot of shows with Microsoft to share knowledge. I shared that same story on the IoT show. I'm going on LinkedIn Learn Live this, this Wednesday. So a couple days now, but it's using Power Apps to connect to speech services to translate between languages and speak it out. So speech to text and text to speech and a translator, and connecting them all together in a Power App. So just, yeah, it's just learning all the different components how to connect them together, and then sharing that knowledge with others.
Well, it's pretty amazing, and so you'd be one of the stars within the MVP program because you're doing something really useful. Microsoft, reaches out to you to try to showcase what you're doing because it is tech for good or AI for good, and Microsoft actually has a formal AI for good program, right? So,
Right. Yeah.
but you're also part of the Startup Founders Hub. Can you talk about that?
That is so the MVP award is cool because you get to see some of the technology before it goes public, and then when it goes public, you get to share that story and share that what you've learned about it with everybody. But then it's the Startup Founder Program is even bigger, I think, because it gives you just like access to just so many resources. And it's just like they flood you with resources and Azure credits and say, we see that you're doing good. We see that you have a company that can scale, and we're just going to give you everything you need, be it credits for different apps, different tools, and just accelerate your growth. So that one, that's an application process, and you tell them what you're doing and you submit a video, and it's actually really, really simple to apply. And once you go through the review, it's like a week later you get the credits and stuff. So I would encourage others to do it because there's not a lot of downside. You just have to get kind of over that fear of, I had this too. It's like, oh, this is Microsoft. Like, should I really be applying for this?
So you're
What's
talking Microsoft has this, it's about a $500 million program right now to seed it. It's
Yeah.
called Startup Founders Hub, and you can search for it online. And if you're an entrepreneur and you've got an idea and you want to deploy it and have help with it, you can go through this application process. Microsoft, when you first applied, do they have the mentor program yet, where you could have somebody try to help you as well?
Yeah. I use that quite a bit. It's an individual, and he schedules time with you, and he's an expert in all Azure resources, and he architects it. So, that was one of the big questions is you log into Azure and you see like hundreds of resources, and you're like, what do I do now? And that's why the studio is so nice because it like niches down and categorizes and gives you a good UI. But he's the one that connects it all together. He's like, oh, you want to help people who can't speak with an app? Okay, connect this resource with this, and here are some instructions, and I'll work with you through this process to get you across all the barriers and get to what you need. So yeah, the mentor program, and then well, there's an engineering mentor program, and then there's a business mentor program too. So you can I haven't started that one yet, the business mentor, but you have an advisor to advise you on your startup business too. So yeah, so many good resources in that.
Yeah, you're mentioning he, but it could be
Yeah.
any, right? So
Right.
any person, right? So
Yeah, and actually, so there's a lady, well, and she's in Thailand, and I'm working with her, and she's officially a mentor, but I connected with her on LinkedIn outside of the startup program, but I'm working with her too on stuff. So yeah. And it's international. That's the beauty of it too, is you connect with mentors. You can choose mentors from overseas. So it doesn't have to be constrained just to the US either.
So how far has SolisMatica reached now? I mean, you've expanded considerably, right? Can you talk about the different countries?
Yeah. Well, it's like I was an AI MVP about 6 months before ChatGPT got released, and then I remember seeing the news that when Microsoft kind of invested in half of OpenAI, and that was the moment I was like, this changes everything for us, all our AI MVPs. But it was shortly after that I started getting a lot of keynote speech presentations, and then one really interesting one was the state of Michigan sent me to Thailand and Vietnam to talk about OpenAI and Azure. And then when I got to Thailand, because some of the connections I made with Microsoft, they said, Charles, come and present with us to EGAT, which is the Electric Grid Authority of Thailand, which controls all the, gas stations, power grid, everything in Thailand. And I was like, wow, like it's unimaginable, Steven. I'm like, what just happened here? I'm standing with Microsoft in front of all these Electric Grid Authority of Thailand, engineers, and I presented to them about OpenAI and how it can be used to model, charging systems and, maybe simulate where they're going to fail. So we actually did that. We're like, okay, if the data coming from this charging station is this, and then we used another GPT-4 instance, and we said, this data is the voltage is going low on this sensor. What does this mean for this charging station, and when is it going to fail? And we analyzed and predicted when it would fail with GPT-4. And, like, to have that opportunity has just been incredible.
I mean, excuse me. So you're, further solidifying your commitment into healthcare and education and promoting safer tourism as well, right?
Exactly. So I'm actually, so we're going back to Thailand. When I was in Thailand in December, my 3 boys had, they got a stomach virus, and we went to the hospital, and, and we were there, and I was trying to speak my Thai. It's a little rusty, and some serious concerns came up, like, flight back. And when they gave me the medication, everything was in Thai, and I'm not good as good as reading Thai, right? And then speaking with a pharmacist, I'm like, oh, wow, this is potentially, a life or death situation for a lot of tourists that come to Thailand. And a lot of Thais don't speak English, especially in the northern region where my family's from. So just that idea of giving people access to important medical information, especially when they're traveling overseas, for tourism, is, that popped up into my brain and that's such a big thing for Thailand is tourism. So anyways, you can see I'm passionate about how this can help people. So
I mean, you're also on the board of directors for Holland Museum, Meditation Services, Lakeshore, Rotaract, and then the
Rotaract.
Michigan Asian American Association. Can you talk about each one of those communities that you're on the board?
Sure. The museum has been so interesting because they're preserving people's stories. And that's it. I did that in my TED Talk too, is AI, it preserves, it models language, but in language, we embed our cultures. So in a way, the museum could use AI to preserve, their history in that way. This is new for museums to process, but it's an interesting way of preserving stories and history. Lakeshore, the Rotaract Club is interesting. That's a younger version of Rotary. And I also mentor an Interact Club at the high school level, but that's service above self, and it's a global network. So it aligns with what I do. And the high school is working to prevent drownings in youth, because like countries like Thailand don't have the funds for swim lessons and water safety. So we're working globally to prevent drownings across the world. Let's see, mediation services is an interesting one, because that's, instead of going to court, we try to mediate between parties. And, AI, like you just saw in my demo, you can use GPT-4 to understand the unwritten languages and anticipate how, human emotion can detract from a good mediation discussion. So there's applications of AI there. And the Asian American Association, that was really interesting, because there's so many Asians here in Holland, Michigan, and West Michigan, but we're from different islands. A lot of we're separated by oceans, and we'd have different religions, and so like we talked about, we're a little bit more, we want conformity in community, and we aren't as outspoken. So people say this about Asians in West Michigan is we're a little bit invisible. So I'm trying to use AI to promote our voice and have a unified voice for our community.
So that's a lot of donated time. Like you're doing this pro bono, right?
Yeah. All the board stuff is pro bono. But it's like, I think when I started my own business 2 years ago, I came with the conclusion that I started looking at like end of life. If I lay on my deathbed, what are things I want to be known for? What are things I want to do? And these things add value because they fill that passion, or they fill that need of making an impact on society and being known for something. And what do I want to be known for? And these are things I want to be known for, is giving back to the community. So I think that's where I find the value, and that's why I do it pro bono.
It sounds like you have AI being used in everything you do every day.
Every day, like I have it open, and every single question I have, I put in and I work with it. So yeah, the prompt engineering, I do that all day, every day. I live this world.
Okay, so can you give some tips on prompt engineering? And there's things like chain of thought, tree of thought, algorithm of thought. There's self-reflection. There's all these. There's system two attention. There's these different kinds of techniques. Can you mention some of these techniques that you're aware of that are useful, and maybe give some examples?
So the self-reflection is probably the one I use every day. Kind of like what I told you, is I have the system message, just trying to give it context. And then you saw I took your context and put it in. And they talk a lot about, and I hate the word hallucinations, because I've found that that's not a great word for it. But it's, if you don't give enough context and direction, it'll make things up because it's low probability stuff. So I've learned now to give it enough context where it doesn't really go off. Now every time I prompt it, I've learned to find the edges and keep it grounded enough so that it gives me very, very useful information. So I think that's one of the tips, is just play with it enough so you learn when you ask it and it'll deviate, and then don't do that, because that's not going to be as useful to you. The self-reflection is what I use every day. At the end of the day, I say, reflect on this chat, and give me input on how we can improve our chat tomorrow. And also, you saw in some of those notes, I view it from a psychologist, a neurologist, a linguist, expert perspective. So I prompt it to view it from kind of a metacognition state and think about its thinking and my thinking. So that's a lot of the self-reflection that goes on. So those are the main things I use, and that's how I learned how to prompt it, each day.
Do you spend any time sort of looking at some of the papers that, like Orca 2 was released, and it looks really interesting. It's a open source model, Llama 2, of course. Do you play with any of the open source material? Do you actually play with OpenAI directly as well, or everything's through Azure?
So I do play with OpenAI, but I try to play more with Open Azure, the Open AI in Azure. The other stuff I do keep tabs on, and I use GPT-4 because I don't understand all the words sometimes. And I was like, what does this mean? So I use GPT-4, and I just did this yesterday. There was something about it was embeddings, and using RAG and all this, and I was like, what do these terms mean? So I used GPT-4 to summarize it, and then I was like, explain this in terms I can understand. So I use it to summarize I use GPT-4 to summarize itself and other open source and other languages.
I just finished hosting in O'Reilly a series on generative AI. In fact, I helped them bring speakers in, one for healthcare, one in finance, and then also for one on government. And then they asked me to host the conference at kind of like a half day, which is really interesting because you're embedded in everything. I
Yeah.
realized you'd be great for their generative AI. So I'm just kind of brainstorming. If you're interested, then if one of these things come up, I'll introduce you to them. And O'Reilly is, like from a business point, top ranked, right, in content.
Right.
Um,
No, I would love it.
Are you going to AI? So you've got AI for Good embedded in throughout your profile. Are you going to the actual AI for Good summit, the one that actually created this global meme by any chance?
Oh, well, I heard you're a big part of that, right? So I'm, this is all new to me. I don't even know where to go. So maybe we could catch up, Stephen, and you could point me where I need to go, because I've been applying this, and you see me, I do it every day, and I'm learning so much. I don't even know where to take all this information. So, and I want to do it in a way that people understand. And that's why these stories are so amazing, is because like, the girl born without speech, the people going into ALS, cerebral palsy, cancer, surgery, like, these are stories that mean something to people and are applied. So I would love to share these stories so that more people, like, I want to, mention this. I think we're almost out of time, but I gave this keynote presentation to a group, and I asked the people afterwards what they got out of my presentation. And one person just graduated college, and he said, the thing I got out about this is, like, it's almost like you can dream something, and then you show that you can make it happen in real life. Like, you can dream and just make it happen now. And he was like, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a great message. Like, people can dream and follow their dreams and make an impact in society. And that's one message I want to share with people. So.
Okay, so we're down to our last question. In fact, I have an interview right after this, so we're going to wrap up. But what are your final recommendations to the audience? You gave some of that. You can dream something and you can make it happen. What are some additional recommendations you want to give to your audience? And that's the last question.
I think, and what keeps me up at night, and after I've been in this world for a little bit now, I think, as I reflect on this is so powerful. More people need access, especially those, and there's things we've never tried before. So just don't be afraid. Nobody will be able to guide you sometimes, because you're going to explore into areas on the edge of what's possible, I think. And, like that person realized, you can now dream, and now you can make things happen. And I hope more people log into Azure, create an account, and start playing with this, because the more we do this, the more I think we can, contribute to humanity and society and make an impact. So I think that's what I want to end with. Is it's a little scary, but I encourage others to take that step and walk into the unknown.
Charles, it's such a joy talking to you today. Thank you for coming in and sharing so much of what you're doing and the impact you're having globally. So the audience would, really appreciate you sharing so many of your insights with everybody here.
Thank you, Stephen. Have fun. You have another interview. And then hopefully we touch base about all the other opportunities that you're connected with, and I can share more of my story.
Sounds good. Thank you again.
Yep. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.